having that memorized repertoire of various things, which is part intentional but part accidental, is just enriching.
Hello, and welcome to the Arts of Language podcast with Andrew Pudewa, founder of the Institute for Excellence in Writing, or as many like to say, IEW. My name is Julie Walker, and I'm honored to serve Andrew and IEW as the Chief Marketing Officer. Our goal is to equip teachers and teaching parents with methods and materials which will aid them in training their students to become confident and competent communicators and thinkers. Andrew, we've spent many episodes talking about memorization and the value of memorizing poetry, for example. We talked about that in your talk, Nurturing Competent Communicators, and how important that is to help with the formation of words and vocabulary. But I know that you have another talk, By Heart, The Goodness of Memory, that talks more about the value of memorizing stuff. So I thought we could spend some time today talking about that.
Yes, well, that talk, which we have a good studio level recording of that talk, By Heart, The Goodness of Memory, kind of came into my thinking as the result of a talk I had given a year before that called 10,000 Times and Then Begins Understanding, which I only did once.
But it's a good talk.
Yeah, it's about repetition and the difference between what the world might perceive as vain repetition versus valuable repetition, and how do we discern the difference. And when you say vain repetition, that usually makes people think of the scriptural injunction against it, but there's the danger of people assuming that all repetition is vain.
Right.
We also see this expressed in kind of the progressive 20th century views, kind of Deweyism that evolved or developed or infected, I guess would be the better word, modern education, as where memorizing things, in Dewey's view, was at best a waste of time and more likely a stifling of creativity,
right,
and an unnecessary burden on children.
Yeah, why memorize things when you have the world at your fingertips, the world of knowledge at your fingertips?
And when Dewey started pushing this in the early 1900s, and then it became kind of more of the standard fare in teacher education up in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, we had not yet entered the world of instant access to information.
Right.
So even before we had the ubiquity of internet-connected devices and Wikipedia, there was this kind of attack against memory in education. So, what I do in that talk is try to speak about the goodness of memory and then point out a few obvious things. For example, everything we know, everything we can do, everything that we can say or recognize, whether it's our mother's face or a poem or a Latin verb conjugation or how to do a layup, everything that we can know and do and say and use to create with, we acquired through memory.
Right, sure.
So an attack against memory essentially is an attack against humanity. And one of the things I realized in this contemplation was my mother. She was a music teacher.
Right.
She taught piano and voice for my whole life. And so I just grew up in this world, and she taught at home. So there were, a lot of discussions and helping at recitals. And then I grew up playing music as well. I never remember her saying, you have to memorize your piece. she would always say, you must learn it by heart. And so that idea of by heart, well, there's so much truth to that. I'm sad that the expression has gone away. It's very rare that you would hear anyone ever say, learn it by heart.
Listeners, let's resurrect that phrase. Let's start using that more often, because I too remember learning music pieces by heart. Not a well-known fact in Julie Walker world. I grew up playing the accordion.
The accordion?
Yes.
I would have put you on like a French horn or a flute or something.
Well, later in high school, I did play trumpet, but the accordion was the closest I could get to piano because I always dreamed of being able to play the piano.
Well, in a way, an accordion has advantages. You can carry the thing around a lot easier.
It's true.
But that idea, what you memorize, what you commit to memory goes right into your soul in a way. I mean, what you memorize will affect you. And I mentioned in, other talks or podcasts that I did not grow up in a Christian home per se, but I don't know why. I did memorize, the Lord's Prayer, the 23rd Psalm.
Nice. Yep.
And I'm not sure what motivated me to do it. I know I was not forced to do it. Maybe my mother thought, well, it's just kind of a part of being literate. Or I think she had a little bit more of a spiritual bend than my father. And I just remember having memorized that. And then, there'd be some kind of unpleasantry, something I didn't like about what was happening in my life. And I would recall the words, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I didn't have a theological connection with it. But number one, the beauty of the poetry.
Right.
And number two, the kind of innocent faith of a child that was encapsulated in this thing that was in my soul because I had spent the time to try and memorize it. And, I also point out to parents, look, if you do not give your children good stuff to memorize, they will memorize stupid stuff. They're wired for memory. I remember working very hard to memorize 2 all-beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickles, onions on a sesame seed bun.
Yes.
Which was a commercial that I heard, I'm sure,
over and over
thousands
again.
of times on the television, attesting to the effectiveness of repetition to inject ideas into the minds and hearts of people.
Well, and the fact that you can still say it today, 30 years later?
Well, and I would never eat such a horrible thing as a Big Mac, but I do know the formula for a Big Mac. But, today the options are worse. There's really ugly stuff that kids will memorize because it's in their environment. So it's almost like you have to choose. You will breathe air and eat food whether you want to or not. You will take things in through the memory. And so to the degree that we as parents and teachers can provide nutritious language and thought.
Yes.
And not just nutritious in that it's good for you, but also it tastes good, Taste and see the goodness of the Lord. Taste and see the beauty of language. And we have such a rich tradition. So,
that's true.
That's one thing that I have kind of been sad about is to see, in the popular culture, people just aren't learning things that once upon a time everyone knew.
Yes.
Or at least in my position of imagining that once upon a time everyone knew, certain things that, you didn't even have to believe them, but at least you were literate.
Right. Yeah.
And that goes even to like the preamble of the Constitution or the first sentence of the Declaration of Independence or the very short and easy to memorize Gettysburg Address or even just little snippets of scripture that connect us with our heritage, with our cultural origins, so to speak. Those have just kind of all gone out the window. And I think it's sad because, our country, we are
the melting pot.
And there was a pride, there was a happiness, there was a joy in the fact that we all had these different rich traditions and we could draw from those, and yet there were things we could hold in common.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, as we lose both of those, we are losing part of the broth, if you will, in which we can live and happily be a nation of diverse people.
Yes, exactly. My mind went to actors and how we esteem actors, and yet they spend so much time memorizing stuff. So, but what are they memorizing?
Right. Well, when you meet a well-read person,
okay, sure,
you kind of have a bit of awe for their fluency with ideas. And whether they have memorized exact quotes or they simply have had enough repetition to be familiar with those things. And they can weave those ideas and names and events and references and they weave them into a conversation, maybe an analysis of our current world or a conversation about someone's life. You kind of are just, I don't know, I'm kind of envious. Like, wow, I wish I knew as much as that person knows. Well, how did that person learn that stuff? Well, it's the combination. I mean, we go back to nurturing competent communicators.
We keep going there, don't we?
They read or were read to a lot of good and great literature. And so it furnished their mind with not just the vocabulary, not just the grammar and syntax, not just the beauty of language, the literary devices, the schemes and tropes, but very often with the seminal ideas of what's right and good and true and just and beautiful. And then, a lot of people do have a store of memorized things that might include scripture or poetry or quotations or excerpts. I don't know a single person who could quote something and not be grateful that they could do that.
Sure.
You think about who could you quote. I know a few Chesterton quotes, a few Mark Twain quotes, maybe a John F. Kennedy quote, a few Bible verses that would float into my mind at any moment. And what does that do? It kind of punctuates my point. It kind of adds depth, adds credibility. It connects my thinking right now with someone who lived 100 or 200 years ago. So having that memorized repertoire of various things, which is part intentional but part accidental, is just enriching. It's just enriching. Whereas I don't think you would get that same satisfaction of knowing, a rap song or the formula for a Big Mac or some random thing that advertising stuck into your brain. I find it incredibly ironic that while modern education has kind of marginalized the importance of repetition and knowing stuff, the advertising world has maximized that through repetition and forcing you to know stuff that is not even necessarily good or true. I mean, I'll bet almost every American walking around in the country would, at some point in their moments of living, have "You deserve a break today," float into the... I don't deserve a break today. I mean, what have I done to earn a break? But oh no, just by merit of being alive, you deserve McDonald's. It's almost insidious the way advertising uses these natural human faculties to inject into your brain things that displace the good and true and beautiful that should be in your brain. And so it's just this huge cultural shift. So I guess my point would be, if you don't actively pursue cultivating the memory intentionally, you will end up with accidental and not necessarily beneficial snippets running around your consciousness.
Yes. And so I'm hearing now our listeners respond, but Andrew, I have such a hard time memorizing stuff. Do you have any words of wisdom for me to help me memorize the good stuff?
So easy plus one. So I'm old. I'm 62 years old right now, and my memory is not as good as it used to be.
So I just want to insert this right now. You are not old, Andrew. 62, because you're only 1 year older than me, and I am not old. So therefore,
we are not old.
We're not old.
But
we're older.
We do experience the problem of getting older and finding it a little bit harder to remember stuff, whether it's the name of a person. If we don't make a conscious effort to do it, we may not remember that name. And then next time we see the person. So, one thing I've done is just work really hard to learn names of people and then use mnemonic devices so that the next time I see that person, I'll connect it with something. And, and there's a whole lot we could talk about in memory. In fact, I believe we will at some point have a actual product, a writing program that will help students learn memory techniques.
Yes.
But okay, so I think I told you this, but most people don't know because it's kind of a new idea. I've been trying to spend time in the sauna.
Oh, nice, yes.
I have been convinced of the health benefits of sitting in 185 degrees temperature and sweating as hard as I can for as long as I can. And, this is like anything. You kind of have to build up a tolerance to it. And so I'm trying to gradually increase my length of time. And it's not fun. I don't think, it's going to be enjoyable. No, I think, okay, I'm going to really have to force myself to do this. But I'm doing it, often enough, almost every day, that it gets easier and easier. But what do you do when you're sitting there? The time moves very slowly when you are in such an uncomfortable situation. Well, I just decided to start memorizing prayers in Latin.
Oh.
So, I'm into this stacking habits idea. Like, if you want to do something, you have to do it every day. If you want to do something else, you got to do every day. If you could do those two things at the same time, hey, the proverbial two birds with one stone makes no sense because nobody ever did that. But nevertheless, I started memorizing these Latin prayers, in part because I wanted to maintain my Latin. Number two, I thought, well, it's just cool. And number three, if I'm really working hard mentally, I will be distracted from my physical discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And I also thought the more Latin prayers I have memorized, the more I'll have to recite, the longer it'll distract me. And so gradually I should be able to increase both the memorized repertoire with the number of minutes I can tolerate 185, sometimes even 190 degree sauna. But it's slow. For me, it's really slow. And I don't have the paper or the phone. I'm in there, just my brain. It's whatever I happen to carry around in my brain. And so, I start out with like 4 words, and I'll recite these 4 words again and again and again and again and again and again and again. And then the next day I may not remember them. I'm like, I did that 50 times. Well, okay. So
10,000 times.
4 words, just 4 words until it's really solid. Then I just add on 2 or 3 more words, and then I will recite all 7 or 8 of those words and do that again and again until it's super solid. And then I'll do that again and again and just gradually add on. And once I got the whole Anima Christi prayer memorized, then I would just always recite that 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 times, and it's getting faster and faster and faster. And so what's so interesting is you notice that your brain is in this mode of struggling to remember the next word. Then you get past that, and then you're in this mode of struggling to remember the next sequence of words. And then you get past that, and then pretty soon there's no struggle. It's automatic, or it's second nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I got that one under the belt, and so I went on to another one and another one and another one. Now I've got about 5, and the whole sequence to do each one of them 3 times takes me about 4 or 5 minutes. So if I can do that whole sequence 3 times, boom, I'm 12 minutes. And that's my current main daily goal. I'd like to get up to 20.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I'm sure our listeners would ask, and I don't know that we would ever present strategies of how to sit in a sauna as a separate podcast.
It's just me.
Sure,
it's just me. But the idea, and anyone wanting to learn something, is you decide what you want to learn and you say, well, does this have merit to make it worth the effort?
Yes. And
then you just start doing it, even if it's just one word, right? Or 3 words. And then, did I get it right? Did I actually get that right? And in Latin, it's a little bit trickier because, did I say it the way it's spelled? Did I remember the correct ending of the word? Did I miss an article or a preposition or something? Or it's not articles, but did I miss a preposition or get the wrong preposition, right? And then I go back and check and then self-correct. And then next time, try again. And then ultimately, once I have the whole thing memorized, I test myself by writing it out and comparing the written out version with the original. And then, oh, wow, I've been saying that word incorrectly. Okay, I fixed that or whatever. That, I think, for me has been a really good personal stacking of stuff. And part of what I've also been contemplating these days is the problem of what do you have if you lose everything? So, what if? What if society broke to a point where I didn't have all the things I have? And you can start making a list of the things that you could lose, from your bank account and your income to your home to your car. Good heavens, what if you had no phone?
Right.
Right? Literally, you would be in a state of extreme emotional stress and disruption because you'd feel cut off from everything. Well, what if? Whether I ended up in as a political prisoner, or I ended up stranded somewhere, or we all ended up with no electricity it's bleak to think about, but it's not impossible. What would I have if I had nothing? I would only have what's in my mind. I would only have what I have furnished my mind with in terms of the stories, the scriptures, the Latin prayers,
right?
For whatever they're good for, the memories that I had. And then my capacity to serve other people in that situation would very much be dependent upon the quality of whatever I was carrying around in my brain.
Right. So by investing in yourself, you're investing in others.
Yeah. And if I go through the rest of my life and I never have lost everything in that way, well, I'm still richer as a result of it. Plus, it's just cool, right? I met a boy once at a homeschool convention who had memorized, and this child was probably, if I recall, maybe 10 or 11 years old.
Okay.
He had memorized the entire book of James.
Nice.
And I said, wow, could you recite some of it for me? He goes, which chapter?
Nice.
Right? And so I just picked one at random, and he recited it. And I just thought, this is cool on so many levels.
Not only was he able to do it, he was able to do it under pressure, because saying a random chapter that you've called, that Mr. Pudewa has called upon, wow, that's really good.
Yeah. He could just go straight to that spot. And I did not meet this person, but I have heard the story of a girl who memorized the entire New Testament.
Wow.
She started when she was about 6, and she accomplished it by the age of 16.
Wow. That's incredible.
That is pretty amazing.
Yeah. 10 years to memorize all of New Testament. I would, yes.
Now, like I said, I didn't meet this girl.
Sure.
But think of the richness of carrying around, just the Gospels, but the Gospels and the epistles and all the way up to the Apocalypse, that's like mind-blowing. But, I'm sure she experienced what all of us would experience, whether it's music or dance or any kind of physical activity. I'm thinking of martial arts, katas, things like that. Certainly language. The more you have memorized, the easier it is to memorize more.
I think that's a really important point, Andrew. I want you to say that again.
The more you have memorized, the easier it is to memorize more. So, I found this to be like 100% true with music students. If I had a student who had done what I asked and maintained a memorized repertoire of music, learning the 11th piece in book 1 was so much easier and faster and better than a person who had not maintained the memorized repertoire trying to learn that same piece. And so, if you spend half an hour a day doing that, whether it's, music is the obvious one because you practice every day. If you spent half an hour a day practicing music, well, if you spent half your time just playing what you already knew and making it better and easier and faster and smoother and everything, and half your time learning a new piece, you'd learn a new piece faster than if you spent 100% of your 30 minutes trying to learn a new piece. It would probably even be true at around 2/3. Like 2/3 of your time practicing what you already know, making it easier and faster and better, and 1/3 of your time trying to learn something new. I don't know where the perfect sweet spot is. Obviously, if you spent 100% playing what you know and 0% trying to learn something new, you'd never learn something new. So where's the ratio? Where's the optimal ratio? But I would guess it's somewhere in between that half to 2/3. And yet a lot of people don't realize that, and they spend a lot of time learning a new poem, but they forget their old poem.
Right.
But the thing that, I've realized is any new thing, whether it's music or dance or language, is really not entirely new. It's a combination and permutation of previously known patterns. It may increase in complexity, but the complexity broken down is still the previously learned patterns. And so we furnish our mind, we stock our consciousness, we learn by heart, it becomes second nature. Then we can draw on those patterns to acquire new patterns and expand our repertoire. And then those newly memorized patterns empower us, and it goes on forever. I'm always realizing this painful thought. We can finish with this because I know we're about out of time, that technology will atrophy. It will cause atrophy of the skill which it replaces.
Yes.
And one of my favorite stories is that story of the king of Egypt and the great god Thoth or Tuth or however you say it. We've never really figured it out because we haven't found someone who speaks ancient Egyptian. Anyway, Thoth, Thoth, said to the king of Egypt, I will give you these gifts of technology. And one of them is writing. And this was related in one of the Socratic dialogues by Plato. And the king of Egypt said, well, thank you, we'll take your gift, but this gift will have the effect of weakening men's memories because they will rely on the written word rather than their own memory. So, we can now see that times a million. We don't have to know anything anymore because we can just ask our phone. But I don't see that as a valid reason to not cultivate the human faculty of memory in the really sad and puny way that we are capable of being modern 21st century technology-enhanced humans. But I will go into the sauna, and the first thing I will say is, Anima Christi Sanctifica me, Corpus Christi salva me, Sanguis Christi inebria me, Aqua lateris Christi lava me, Passio Christi comforta me. And it goes on for a while.
Yes, that's lovely. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please subscribe to our podcast in iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, or just visit us each week at iew.com/podcasts. Here you can also find show notes and relevant links from today's broadcast. One last thing, would you mind going to iTunes to rate and review our podcast? This really helps other smart, caring listeners like you find us. Thanks so much.